Seahawks fans, wherever you may be. Welcome back for another edition of the Seahawks Playbook Podcast. Join your host, Bill Alvstad, and co-host, sports writer and football analyst Keith Myers, as we talk Seahawks football. Hey, Seahawks fans, welcome into the show. I'm Bill Alvstad, sitting down with Keith Myers, and we're talking 2022 NFL Draft. The Seahawks made their first pick. Keith, what did you think, man? Welcome into the show.
Well, I like the pick. I like the player. I like the position. I like all that. I was a little surprised they didn't move back, get some extra picks, and try and get themselves in a position where, you know, they could get a left tackle and something else. But, you know, it takes two to trade. And if no one was willing to give them worthwhile compensation for that, you know, because, right, if they're moving back, you're saying, okay, we're going to take a lesser player. What's that risk, you know, worth to us? And if someone's going to go, not going to offer something like, oh yeah, we'll give you a 6th round pick, they go, nah, we'll just take the better player.
Well, it is interesting that there were teams that came in after Seattle. That's where the trade started in the first round, is after the Seahawks picked. Then you had the Jets at 10, and then the team that you identified early on in this process as somebody that was only half done in the earlier trade before the draft, consummated that with the to get into the 11th spot. Ended up drafting a wide receiver. Their second pick back at 19 ended up being Trevor Penning, maybe one of those offensive tackles you were thinking maybe the Seahawks would trade back for and accumulate extra value. And Jordan Davis went at 13. I thought Seahawks might be in that game. Zion Johnson at 17 is an interesting pick.
That seemed early for him.
A little early, but the wide receivers to me, I thought was the most interesting story in the first round. I just thought a whole ton of them went off the board, and it kind of helped Seattle in a way. I mean, when Drake London went at 8, that gave an opportunity for the Seahawks to have either an offensive tackle or an edge player available to them. It seemed like Jermaine Johnson would have been there. He ended up going really late. And then Charles Cross was sitting there, a player that we had talked about a few different times over the course of the last 3 or 4 months, Keith, but it wasn't one of those guys that we talked about recently.
No, we kind of ignored him because he was supposed to go later than 6 to Carolina. So the idea that he would be available for Seattle to pick seemed ludicrous, but yet here we are with him on the Seahawks roster now.
Yeah, and Pro Football Focus had him ranked as their number 1 offensive tackle prospect in this draft. I mean, most folks had him as 3rd, and I think that's, you know, regardless, 10th overall. I think he's a good fit. The way I think about this is it's like this was the safe, kind of rock solid, steady pick that we kind of haven't seen from the Seahawks for a while.
Yeah, I mean, it really is. You know, this is an excellent pick. I mean, the Seahawks have had, you know, the last time they picked this high was when they got Russell Okung. That worked out pretty well when he was healthy. Since then, they're picking at the bottom of the draft, or they've been trading away their picks into this win now mode. And it was nice to see them get an absolute blue chip player, someone who looks like he could be, you know, the best tackle in this draft. I get that he's the 3rd ranked because he's got work to do. He, you know, didn't really run block in college, so there's going to be some learning for him to get there. But when it's all said and done, he could be the best of this group. So it's a good pick for them. It really is. And
comes out as the best pass blocking tackle. And it seems like that's going to be universal thought, which is really good. I mean, I think the Seahawks have been at least no better than the middle, if not, you know, in the 20s somewhere as far as the rankings on pass blocking protection and so forth. So this is a good deal. So what happens to Dwayne Brown, Keith? Do you think that possibly Charles Cross might play right tackle in 2022 and they bring Dwayne Brown back?
I doubt it. I mean, Dwayne Brown is out there unsigned. All 32 teams have taken a pass on him so far. The Seahawks, even, they usually go and have their hedges. They go in and sign someone that's he's to be on the roster in case the draft doesn't go the way they expect it to. And they didn't even bother. I'm guessing that his contract demands are way too high. And unless he's willing to come way down, he may be done playing in the NFL.
Interesting. The only reason I mention that is that at Charles Cross's pro day, they had him playing right tackle a little bit over there, taking some reps there. But he's clearly a left tackle of the future for the Seattle Seahawks. I think it's a solid pick. I think it's a great pick. Any surprises beyond this pick for any team?
Oh, there's tons of them. Because what you end up with here is a bunch of wide receivers and a big run on them way before it felt like they should be a run on wide receivers. And then you look at, there's this big gap after the 18th pick with, no wide receivers. And so it's like, what was going on there? I mean, I get that Atlanta probably got some teams really panicky when they took Drake London at 8.
Yeah, I think that was it.
And so, the Jets at 10 went wide receiver. Then the Saints moved up for a wide receiver. And then Detroit.
Which is weird to me.
It is. It's really weird. Like, they did that trade to get them in position to trade up. I thought they were trading up. When they made that trade, I thought, all right, here goes Malik Willis off the board. And they traded up for a wide receiver. And I was very confused as to.
That's a lot of draft capital when you think about it. Like, the draft capital to get those picks initially from the Eagles and then to move up for a wide receiver is astounding to me. And then you saw the Lions do that for Jameson Williams, which is interesting as well.
Yeah, that was a lot of. So I'm looking for the full part things on here. So the Lions moved up from 32 to 12. They gave up 32, 34, 66.
Wow.
To move up. And that's just a lot, especially on a team like the Lions that don't have a quarterback and they're just having so many roster parts that are missing. They need a lot of talent, and to give up that much draft capital to move up and take a wide receiver, especially one that is injured and probably won't play the first 6 games, seemed like I just unfathomable. I really just don't get what they were thinking, what that move is for them.
Right.
Like, I'm just completely at a loss. So
right. Yeah. And then Washington, the team that moved down, ended up picking Jahan Dotson. So that was interesting as well. Kenny Pickett was the only quarterback in the first round. Went to Pittsburgh. That was kind of predictable.
I think I did that on one of the mocks last week or earlier this week. I think I'm trying to remember which one, whether it was our Seahawk one or whether it was the one for our other show. But I think it was the one for the other show, the full NFL one. But yeah, I mean, just Kenny Pickett to the Steelers. He goes from Pitt to Pittsburgh.
Doesn't even have to leave the building.
Doesn't even have to get a new apartment. And they play in the same facility. Like the entrance is different, but they play in the same building there in Pittsburgh. So that just seemed like a really easy transition.
So winner of the first round, you got to look at the Jets. I mean,
it's got to be the Jets.
Ahmad Gardner, Garrett Wilson, and Jermaine Johnson. I mean, wow. Yeah, that's like having 3 top 10 picks.
Yeah, I mean, Ahmad Gardner, the best corner in this draft. Granted, he went second with Derek Stingley Jr. going 1 pick before him. But Sauce Gardner going to the Jets, that's a good pick. Garrett Wilson is probably my favorite wide receiver out of that group that went. I think he's the best one of that run of, what was it, four wide receivers and 5 picks.
Yeah.
Or 5 wide receivers and 6 picks. Yeah, that's what it was. And then, then they were able to sit there and wait, and then to have, Jermaine Johnson sitting there at 26. They traded up to get him, so they didn't miss out. But they ended up with 3 first-round picks, but they got a great pass rusher, a big-time wide receiver, and the best cornerback in the draft. It's hard to say that they're not improved.
Wow. Okay. So you like the Charles Cross pick. I think that the methodology as well of the Seahawks taking a tackle at 9, not dropping back, you could argue about value and all that stuff. I think as you look forward in the years to come, I think that's a great pick. And then that kind of sets the draft up for them to allow the draft to kind of come to them as far as not having to press as we go forward into the second and third round. What do you think about that?
Well, this is what I wanted them to do a year ago, was to use their first pick on an offensive tackle, because it set up the rest of the draft really well and gave them an opportunity to pick the best player available. And instead they went wide receiver, and then nothing really fell in a way that was predictable or useful. And so getting that offensive tackle off there, because those offensive tackles, especially, or just really offensive linemen in general, there's a real premium for them. And then there's a big gap. And then, you get guys that are going to be backups. And so to get into that group that is the premium group and not try and get cute with it, you ended up with a blue chipper. You need those guys to win in this league, and they got one.
So what do you say to those folks out there that say the pick is kind of boring and mundane, solid but not spectacular? They were a little disappointed Seahawks didn't pick up value, blah, blah, blah.
Like I said, we don't know what was being offered, as far as trades, what they could get. They chose to take the pick rather than trade. I'm guessing it's because they didn't get much in the way of offers that they liked. And so for them, being in a position to get the guy they wanted, you take it. As far as the value part, as far as it being boring, I'm sorry if offensive linemen are boring. Right. You cannot win without an offensive line. We've seen that
there you go.
Too many times here in Seattle, where it was, Russell Wilson running for his life constantly because the line was awful in front of him. You've got to build your roster, start in the trenches and work your way out. And they are finally starting to do that with getting, some offensive linemen, spending their resources in a way that actually correlates to winning rather than being flashy.
It sounded too like John Schneider said that Charles Cross was one of those players that they had on their board that they wouldn't drop back to get additional value. They would stay with the pick and select him. So whether you believe that or not, that's what they're saying. And you kind of tend to believe that, because I do believe that they probably intended to want to come out of this draft with one of the top 3 offensive tackles. Mm-hmm. And they did. So, okay. So let's talk about round 2 and round 3. Seahawks have picks 40 and 41, and then a pick in the third round. And the best remaining available players. We can kind of go through that list a little bit and maybe identify what you're hoping for. I think would be a good start as far as picks 40 and 41.
Yeah. I honestly think that they need a cornerback, and they're in position to get one. Although the guys that I was really looking at, kind of came out. I really liked Elam, who went out as a first round pick, and so it kind of just comes down to, there's some people available, and
like Andrew Booth still sitting out there. The guy, He's more of a safety, but he plays slot as well. I can't remember now. Jalen Petrie. He's out there as well. And then you've got some guys that are
Josh Gordon.
Josh Gordon, and then a few more developmental kind of guys that we've talked about that would be kind of neat to have. But you could almost trade back a little bit and maybe pick up one of those guys as well. Yeah, so I really
want to see them get a corner, and then after that, let's just do some best player available kind of work here. A guy like Nakobe Dean is still undrafted.
There's no question for me that he's the best linebacker in the draft. It's just that size at 5'11", 229. I'm not sure if he's a 3-4 linebacker anymore.
Yeah. Bowie Mafe is out there as an edge rusher.
We're talking. Yeah.
And then, the running backs, guys like the guy you like, Breece Hall, the guy that I kind of picked for Seattle, which was Kenneth Walker III.
Yeah.
There's this whole stack of edge rushers still available, which is kind of why I like that they went
Becketty, Ajabo, Mafe. You've got Travis Jones, the defensive tackle, Logan Hall. Excuse me.
Josh
Pascal. You've Drake Jackson sitting there. Perry and Winfrey is going to be available. You've got the Sam Williams, who I think is underrated a little bit. You've got the offensive center like Cameron Jurgens is still going to be sitting out there. Abram Lucas, who could play right tackle for the Seahawks, would be out there. You've got all the quarterbacks except for Pickens still on the board. If Seattle's enamored with one of those still, what if Malik Willis is sitting there at 40 or 41? Do you take Malik Willis, even though, he would present pretty decent value at that part of the draft if you believe that you could develop him and that was part of your plan?
Well, I think it comes down with that to, where do you have him ranked and what do you believe about him? Just because he's thought of and everyone, the draft media and everyone was hyping him up as the best quarterback prospect in this class doesn't mean you as a team feel great about him. And, I go back to Geno Smith when he was taken by the Jets in round 2. They didn't really want him, but he was the first round pick quarterback, the only one that people thought of as being a first round pick in that draft. And then when he was sitting there for the Jets in round 2, they felt obligated to take him, and it didn't work out. I don't think you take a quarterback unless you believe in them as, a potential franchise, a potential guy that can do that. Do they believe in Malik Willis?
That's true. Everything you just said is true. But you still could use a developmental quarterback on your roster if you don't know for sure about Drew Lock. And they don't know for sure because he hasn't taken the field for them at all yet.
But he's taken the field for another team multiple times and it's been ugly. So I don't think that it's just because he hasn't put on a Seahawk uniform doesn't mean you don't have any evaluation of him. I feel strongly that they know that he's not a good quarterback. And so I don't think that this is a situation where they're going to go into this going, oh, well, we don't know what we have in Drew Lock. We got to go find out. I think they know what they've got in Drew Lock.
So are there any other players that you would love to have on the Seahawks? Like if you had to make back-to-back picks at 40 and 41 without trading back, what would your selections be? Speed is obviously a need.
It absolutely is a need. And just going through at the best available players here. If I can, I
would have to say take an edge player. You'd have to almost pick an edge player here.
Yeah, I would say you got to go get an edge player. I would probably take Bowie Mafe in there, and then maybe Breece Hall is the second one. Although I think it's a little early for him. Honestly, I'd really love to see them get a corner. Defensive back. And so I don't really like Andrew Booth. I think he's a slot guy who would be very limited on the edge. So I would probably go with, Kyler Gordon out of Washington as the guy. And I would go that just because you go linebacker or either linebacker or defensive end, you go cornerback, you really solidify that defense. And the defense has to carry your team this year. So you might as well put it in a position where it can.
I'm kind of enamored with Arnold Becketty out of Penn State. I think he would be a great fit in the Seahawks defense. David Ajabo is going to possibly be sitting there for the Seahawks. They would have to do, all the medical on that. I think that he would be fine long term, and I think he would actually be a great fit for the Seahawks offense. Boy Mafe, I think, is just a gimme on those guys. And then for my second player, I'm still looking at team speed. I don't want to reach too much, but I really like to get a linebacker out of this. Nakobe Dean is interesting, but I just don't know that he's a good fit. And you're probably reaching for a guy like Leno Chanel at 40 or whatever, but he might be available there at 77, I think is where the Seahawks pick in the third round. Somebody like that, or Chad Muma. Both those guys are Cam Taylor-Britt, the cornerback out of Nebraska, in that area as well. You had mocked Kirby Joseph earlier for the Seahawks in the last mock draft. He would be a really interesting pick there. There's just so much value. Tanding Chindle, the guy with a lot of speed there.
He's a guy that if in round 3, if they don't go linebacker here in round 2, which I kind of don't expect them to, but round 3, I think they could easily go linebacker, and Channing Tindall and Chad Muma are the two names that I would look at as guys that can come in and just make an impact right away.
Yeah. And the guy like Tariq Woolen, if they pick up an extra pick, so if they drop back from 40 or 41 into the mid 50s, I think they could pick up an additional pick under 100 somewhere in the third round, maybe. And a guy like Tariq Woolen, a little bit of a project, but a super duper upside as far as athletic potential at cornerback, would be a great get. Or even now you're in a position where you're looking at wide receiver, or, we mentioned safety, linebacker, offensive tight end, wide receiver, running back, all those position groups. And there's just a ton of talent here. I mean, it really is crazy.
Having 3 picks here today is a good spot to be in. The fact that they're at 40 and 41 tells me they're probably going to take 41 and move back, like you said, into the around 50, somewhere in there. Try and get a pick in the high 80s with it, and the back end of round 3 and turn, instead of having 3 picks today, get 4 and just make that work for them. The other
area of the draft too, and you mentioned it in your mock as well, is trying to get into that 175 to 190 range. I think there's some prospects there as well, and they may want to be at that level of the draft. I don't know that for sure. I just think that they do try to kind of get into different levels if they can, and that would be something that they might consider with a drop back as well.
Yeah, and that is something that they should consider, because you don't want to go from round 5 till round 7 and not have a pick in that range, because there are talented players that fall into that group, and you're just kind of missing out on all of them. And it takes very little to get a pick in that range.
You can even buy a pick in that range if you need to.
Yeah, you can buy it with a 7th or a 6th round pick for next year and that kind of stuff. Because once you get down after round 5, the pick value is pretty much even across the board. And so you can easily get a pick, and so they could move down, from 41 to 42 and get that 6th round loaded in. So it really comes down to, I think they want to get in that range. It won't cost them anything to do so. And I do expect them to come away from today with another draft pick.
And even if they didn't, they could use one of those 4th round picks that are back to back to move around a little bit as well. So I do expect them to do that. They could also come up. They could still come up and identify one of these players that they feel is going to go in the first 6-7 picks of round 2 this afternoon, and go get the guy. Just go get the guy that they want, and that's always a possibility. I don't know who that would be. I don't know who that would be. It could be a Becketty or a Jabba or a Mafe. I don't see it being something other than an edge rusher. But
yeah,
I could be completely wrong.
It would be hard to envision them moving up and not having it be an edge rusher at this spot.
I just think that they're sitting there at 40 and 41. They've got so many players probably on their big board that have equal value that they're probably pretty comfortable right now sticking with that and maybe even dropping back, at least with one of those, maybe both. Who knows? Yeah. Anything else you want to talk about?
The only thing that I wanted to talk about with you was to get your take on, you got those 2 picks at 40 and 41. How do you feel about, if the Seahawks use one of those on a guy like Willis or Desmond Ridder out of Cincinnati?
That would certainly be a tell. I mean, you basically would say, we don't view these guys necessarily as backups. This is possibly be a future franchise quarterback, and they may not play this year, but it would be a great opportunity. I think, especially for a guy like Willis, who's got all that athletic upside. You really don't know what you've got in a pro system. They could bring him in, sit him behind Drew Lock, flail under that situation, have high draft pick next year, but you've already got your quarterback on the roster. You've got the 5th year. Well, you wouldn't have the 5th year option now, but you would have him in the system. And I think there's value to that. And there's value to having a guy like Willis, or even if it's Ridder, to be drafted now and be part of the system. And just that little experience, I think, gives them an edge. And it doesn't preclude you from going with quarterback next year as your first overall pick. It does give you some opportunity for some options and so forth. And they've never really had a really young developmental quarterback on the roster. Yeah. So, yeah, I wouldn't mind it. Now, with so many, like and I'm going to make your point, with so many holes on the roster and so many positions of need, it makes a lot of sense to use this value area in the draft to get quality starters at those positions, rather than have a quarterback that may or may never take a snap in the NFL or be a perennial backup, may be your starter. Here's what I would want. If, like Malik Willis, I'm just using him as an example, if he's John Schneider and Pete Carroll feel like he's kind of got that Russell Wilson kind of vibe where he has a real opportunity, and they're just getting great value by selecting him here in the 2nd round, and they believe that, and they've done all the work, and they make that selection, and that's the reasoning, then I'm okay with that. Yeah. But that would have to be at that level to take a quarterback here. I think rather than waiting 4th, 5th round, taking some developmental guy. If you take Malik Willis here, it's because you believe that he's going to be your eventual starter, I think.
Yeah, you don't use a 2nd round pick on a quarterback if you don't know, because you can in round 2 and round 3 you're trying to get starters, and unless this quarterback is a guy that can turn into a franchise quarterback and lead you to a Super Bowl down the road, don't bother. Just wait. One tell that. The team refuses to admit that they're rebuilding or any of that. If they take a guy like David Ojabo, with one of those picks at 40 and 41, I think what they're signaling is that they really are looking ahead to the 2023 season, because Ojabo is, before his injury, he was a top 10 talent, but with his injury, he's not going to play for the first half of the season this year. And so you're really selecting him looking forward. And so if they take Ojabo, what they're saying is they are planning and everything toward a year from now.
Yeah. And the same thing with a guy like Christian Watson or something. They come out of the left field and choose a, kind of a developmental wide receiver that's kind of a hedge against DK Metcalf's contract situation or something like that. That tells you that they're not really thinking about this year so much as next year. I agree with that. I think there's safer picks here, guys that can have an immediate impact. You take a running back that we do clearly have a need on the roster for, that would have an impact right away. You take a guy like a Becketty, if he's sitting there, a guy that can come in and immediately have a rotational value for you, as opposed to Ojabo, who you're going to either not play in 2022 at all, or he's going to come in November and he's not going to have any time in the system, and he's just going to have, a handful of snaps a game. A guy like Boy Mafe, on the other hand, is like a great pick for having an impact on the roster right away. Yeah. So I think
Channing Tindall would be such a fun pick, just because watching a guy with that kind of speed is always fun. Perry and Winfrey would be a great name. I would not be sad if he ended up in Seattle. I think his ability to get after the quarterback from defensive tackle, from the interior, not just being an edge rusher, really just would be tremendous for the success of this team.
I think the underrated guys that are still on my board right here would be Sam Williams and Drake Jackson, the defensive end out of USC. I just think that there's a little bit of a connection there. They've had him in. I think they've been looking at him. He kind of fits what they're doing, but he needs a little bit of time. That's why he's available here in this spot. He's got all the athletic upside. I think Sam Williams is undervalued. He played in a good conference. He's got some of the best pass rushing win rates in this draft, and I think he's undervalued, and I think he comes in and has an immediate impact as well. And he could be a guy that I think that they're targeting. That
would be cool. I would be okay with that. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I would.
This would be a fun day.
Okay with that.
This is going to be a fun day. So we might see 4 picks today from the Seahawks. There's 3 there. We might see 1. They might package stuff up and just put it all in on one player. I just can't see it, but who knows?
No,
John Schneider's gone up for players before that he's really liked.
Yeah, but it's never been where he had to give up a ton of draft capital to do it. It's always been, little moves in order to get Tyler Lockett, and but it wasn't, or DK Metcalf, but it wasn't like where they dumped a ton of draft capital at a team in order to move up. I can't see them coming away with 1. I think it's much more likely to come away with 4 players today than 1.
Fun, awesome. All right, let's get out of here. Let's go watch the draft.
Let's go do it.
All right, find Keith on Twitter at Myers NFL. You can find me at NW Seahawk. Find the show, podcast, YouTube, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Until next time, go Hawks.
Go Hawks.
Seahawks Playbook Podcast listeners, thanks for joining us for another edition of the show. You can find us on Twitter. Phil is at NW Seahawk. Keith is at Myers NFL. And the show is at Hawks Playbook. You can listen and subscribe to the show at SeahawksPlaybook.com.